What's up, YouTube? We are back with another video. This time we're going to be discussing primary weapons and how they perform on the HIVE worlds. We're going to be going through all the primary weapons in the game. No secondaries or no grenades in this tier list. I wanted to focus primarily on primaries and how they perform against the rupture strain and in general, like, can they do anything on these missions? An overarching theme that you're going to definitely see on this mission is I'm going to assume that you're probably not hosting the match, and I'm going to assume that you're not big time struggling against like dodging the average rupture enemy that's coming up out of the ground. For those you don't know, if you're the host of the match on these missions, the rupture warriors, I would easily say they're overtuned and they are like heat seeking missiles that come out of the ground. So if you are the host, I'm just going to blankly say bring an explosive weapon to force them up out of the ground, so then you can like deal with them at a greater distance so they're not hitting you immediately. If you're not the host, it's much easier to dodge them as they come out of the ground. All you need is some small amount of like mobility and to see them, snaking towards you. And the reason why I'm doing this is because if I didn't do that and I came from the perspective as the host, the tier list would be just dominated purely by explosive weapons at the top and then medium pen weapons and then light pen weapons. It would obviously tell a story and they need to change it, but it wouldn't tell where I think it's going to end up and where the majority of players are, because not everybody's the host of the match. 3 out of the 4 players are not the host. So let's get into it. First, the coyote. We were looking at a 75 damage medium pen incendiary assault rifle. This thing's great. It's really good against bugs in general just because they tend to have smaller HP pools, and it just feels really nice against the spewers and the rupture warriors, and just in general feels great. They gave it 8 backup mags with 45 rounds. It has tons of ammo, just a well-rounded AR. It doesn't have much stagger other than against like the smallest of enemies like a hunter and such, but I do really like it. As far as attachments, you're looking at just optics, underbarrels, and muzzles, but I do think that they actually work pretty well for the weapon. I do wish that the no optics option actually gave you ergonomics. Doesn't for some reason in this situation. It definitely should be like the iron sights one where it actually gives you ergonomics, but I'm not sure. But yeah, feels good. I highly recommend the flash hider and the vertical foregrip. As far as placing on the tier list, I think it's going to be straddling somewhere between the A+ S tier. It doesn't quite have the overall killing ability of, let's say, like an explosive like crossbow or an erupter if used correctly, and it also doesn't have the ability to like force enemies up out of the ground. So you're going to get those awkward situations where there's just like 10+ rupture warriors in front of you all snaking towards you, and if you had a crossbow you could kill them before they got to you, but with a coyote you can't really. So there is that. It is a bit hard because I do think it deserves to be really high up in the tier list, but it doesn't quite match what the crossbow and erupter are. So I'm gonna lightly put it into S tier for now because I feel like it is just an insanely good pick. Keep in mind that when you see those weapons later in the tier list, they're technically like S+. They're all by themselves because they just have this insane extra killing ability. They have the extra utility of being able to kill explosive vulnerable enemies like spewers very easily, and they can blow up like bug holes and stuff like that. So they just have that extra power that maybe the coyote doesn't have. It doesn't mean the coyote is not deserving of a high ranking. Next, we have the medium pen assault rifle for Halo. It's somewhere straddling the line of like an Adjudicator and Lib pen. Smaller magazine obviously than the Lib pen, but more or less very similar stats to the Adjudicator. A little bit faster fire rate, a little bit bigger magazine. I like the weapon. Obviously no customization, and I think just because at the end of the day it's the Halo AR, maybe they can add the 60 round that was in Halo CE, but obviously this is the Halo AR that was based on ODST, so they are kind of design constraints there. But I don't think it's necessarily a bad weapon on bugs, but I also don't think it's one of the better ones. I would probably put it closer to the top end of B+. I can't really put it into A tier just because of the magazine size. On bugs in particular, you kind of end up wanting the larger magazine. If I still had the A- ranking on this tier list, I'd probably put it bottom of A-. I think depending on how much you like that style of weapon, like smaller magazine, but like still fairly heavy hitting, it's still got a decent spot on the tier list. Regular Liberator, unfortunately, we're going to get into the light pen weapons of like the Rupture Strain. It's like bottom of B-, top of C+. It's still like a fantastic weapon if used correctly and you have like the drum mag and you put decent attachments on it. It does feel good if you, especially if you on the Hive worlds and you have like a hunter pouncer strain where like the vast majority of enemies you're weak to light pen. It's just you're not always going to get that. So when you're dealing with just the normal rupture enemies, it can be pretty rough, and you're going to need something else in your loadout to help you against those rupture enemies. Most likely bringing the verdict or some kind of medium pen, secondarily that Talon, or bringing the Liberator guard dog, the Blitzer guard dog to help you, or just bringing gas to keep them at distance or turning around so you can shoot them. Light pen in general is just not preferred for rupture strain. It doesn't mean that light pen isn't good on other parts of the game game or like other strains, but light pen here does not work very well. Liberator Penetrator, I think, deserves to be in the A tier here, especially near the top, especially for like an early game weapon with the 60-round magazine. I absolutely love the Liberator Penetrator. It feels very good on the Ripture side, just because obviously you have that medium pen that you're going to want for those warriors and the spewers, especially. The damage obviously is lower than like the coyote and stuff like that, and it doesn't have the extra fire damage, which does obviously keep it lower, but still a fantastic choice. Hard to really talk too much about it. It's just a solid early game weapon for people starting out the game that doesn't really know where to shoot. Light pen where it works and where it doesn't. Just shoot at the enemy. You have medium pen. It works. Liberator Concussive, I think, is like a little bit higher than the normal Liberator to some extent, just because you have the extra CC factor, crowd control, being able to knock back an enemy. So I think there's a decent amount of value that isn't always seen, I think, from the community. The Liberator Concussive, it doesn't obviously have like the greatest damage per second or anything like that, but the sheer amount of like pushback force that you can have, even against the new Rupture enemies, can be pretty damn good, because you can shoot their underbelly or you can shoot like their claws and stuff like that that are not medium pen and still knock them back. So the Concussive Liberator has something there, and the 60-round magazine is fairly decent. The slower fire rate will hurt it, lower damage will hurt it, but when you run into a stalker inside the caves, you will appreciate having the Liberator Concussive, because they won't be able to touch you, because you're going to be knocking them back constantly. Same with Brood Commanders, they won't be able to affect you. Even Bile Spewers, you can stop them from spewing or spewing in the first place by just shooting their butt. So there's a lot of just like, stop hitting me, I'm gonna run away now kind of energy when you use the Liberator Concussive. So it's honestly not that bad of a pick. It typically gets kind of dogged on a lot harder than I think it deserves. The Killzone AR is like straddling the line between C and D. This is a bit tough. It is extremely similar to the former Liberator, but now that the Liberator, the normal Liberator, has attachments, it's kind of hard for the Killzone AR to, the SDA52 to kind of just live in this environment. It's the unfortunate part of just power creep of like the attachments. It does have like better stats to some degree than the like base Liberator, but as soon as you get like the drum mag on the Liberator, you end up like not really caring about the SDA52 too much. I'm gonna put it like bottom of C tier, but could it be like in D tier? I honestly think it could be. The pacifier, this is a medium pen stun weapon, so at least you're getting the medium pen, but unfortunately it has been changed a decent amount lately. With the pacifier, you're not getting that much customization. You're getting a decent amount, but not that much. Unfortunately, no magazine increase here, maybe in the future. But what they did change was status effects and how they build up on enemies. It used to be where if you were in a 4-player party, you basically applied an extra instance of status for every player in the lobby. So 1 bullet of the pacifier acted like 4 in multiplayer. But if you were in solo, you were just getting the base pacifier. What they did was more or less, it kind of like balanced it out, but the pacifier does not feel as good as it once did in multiplayer. And I kind of wish it would move closer to that. I felt like it had a better place, because it does take a fair few bullets to stun certain enemies, and I'm not a huge fan of that. I wish it was less bullets on average, less than 5. It is a fun weapon to use, especially like if you want something that's not light pen, but still has lots of CC. Stunning a stalker, then going for those mouth shots because they're like frozen in place. Absolutely amazing. I think I'm going to place it like somewhere like B+ A-. I think for now, it'll probably stick in B, but we'll see by the end of the tier list if I want to move it, but it will probably be like near the bottom of A or the top of B. The Liberator Carbine, high fire rate Liberator, more or less, just more recoil, but with the attachments that you can throw on it, you can actually reduce the recoil a ton with the compensator and the vertical foregrip. 2 attachments that are very nice, especially since you get the attachment of the flashlight on it, which is really nice. Really like the Liberator Carbine on other factions. It's a light pen here, which is going to be a bit rough to use against the Rupture strain. Like I said, for the other light pen weapons, it's just going to be like bringing a guard dog or bringing something else in your loadout to deal with those medium pen enemies, so you can actually like shoot them in the back or just like deal with them somewhere else. Other way, I don't think it's necessarily a bad weapon, but you are better off with other weapons. It is a straight up upgrade, I think, at this point than the normal Liberator, unless you're just not overshooting. The Tenderizer, another one that is our light pen, high damage, smaller magazine, but like you can boost the fire rate. So this ends up feeling like an alternative to Liberator Carbine, just a smaller magazine. I really like the Tenderizer on a lot of other factions, but on this one, not so much. I do not really recommend it. I think it's once again going to be like C tier, maybe B-, depending on what your other part of your loadout is. But the smaller magazine and light pen will kind of like end up making it feel like a C tier weapon, and it just won't necessarily feel nice when you're dealing with all these medium pen enemies in front of you. The Adjudicator, I think the Adjudicator is more or less right next to the Halo AR. What's kind of nice about the Adjudicator is it has a few more attachments than the typical Halo AR, so you can like, if you're having a lot of trouble with like the recoil pattern, you can put on like that foregrip and put on a flashlight on it. There's a decent amount of customization here that I think makes it one step a little bit above the normal Halo AR. Yeah, more or less, I think it's like just slightly above. Pretty similar though. The amendment, this is like honestly probably my overall favorite weapon in the game just because of overall feel, but it's not particularly great here. It does have the melee element to it because you have the bayonet at the front. Just to keep in mind, all melee in the game is medium pen, so it can do pretty good. You can get in there and start meleeing rupture enemies a fair bit. And for that, I'm probably going to put it on B-. The raw damage of it is quite high. It's got 200 damage along with very good durable damage. The weapon actually ends up having the same durable damage as the Diligence counter sniper. So the two actually share a lot in common. Just one is light pen, one is medium pen. One has a lot less recoil and can be fired a lot faster. I love using this overall, but you will definitely need more of a precise hand to make sure that like hunters are not overwhelming you and stuff. But being able to one tap your average warrior and being able to like absolutely eviscerate a lot of like longer range like brute commanders and stuff like that feels nice. Bile spears and stuff, obviously going for the mouth or the neck on the new spears. And then like for rupture enemies in front of you, you can definitely dodge them and melee them. It's just do that at your own risk. But I'd say like lower B, B-, I think is a pretty fair place to put it. The Constitution is an interesting one because it actually has like a really good ammo reserve. It has medium pen, it's rounds reloaded, and it has a bayonet, but its fire rate is pretty abysmal and it's pretty hard to use at like medium range because you don't have any scope options. You're only iron sighting with it. It's an okay weapon. I have a hard time kind of placing this. I think it's like somewhere like B- as well. You trade off fire rate versus the amendment, but you gain medium pen, so you're going to be more on average more useful against some of the rupture enemies. You can use the bayonet a decent amount. I know some people will be like, isn't the Constitution the worst weapon in the game? I'm going to assume you can hit your shots. And if you can, I think it's actually not that bad, but definitely some of these recommendations are not going to fit for everybody. Some people are going to be on controller and it's going to be hard to hit their precise shots, or some people are newer to shooters in general and hitting those precise shots might not always be favorable to you. So using something that you can kind of more spray and pray rather than having to be more precise will make more sense for you. So just keep that in mind. Borderline Justice Deadeye. I think this is definitely on the higher side of B+. The smaller magazine is what stops me from putting it into A tier. I really like the stagger though on this. This may be bumped up into A tier by the end of the tier list, but it's definitely on the higher tier of B in my opinion. The stagger, great damage. Rounds reload is awesome, but you may feel like you need to use the increased reload speed armor, either from the Masters of Ceremony Warbond. I really like it personally, and it does absolutely dominate against like the bigger enemies, but the smaller magazine I think will be the biggest contending factor of why it doesn't go into A. The regular Diligence sniper is 165 light pen, so we're looking at our light pen weapons again. It's going to be on the lower end of the tier list. Of course it is. Rupture Strain is really going to hurt this weapon, especially since you're going to be wanting to shoot at enemies more distant, and rupture enemies are not going to let you do that. They're going to get right up and close with you while underground and immune. So yet another weapon that kind of falls into the C tier. I'm actually going to move down the Killzone weapon now. Might as well. It's going to look crowded in the C tier. I don't think it's necessarily a bad weapon to use, but you definitely need to augment your loadout elsewhere to fit this in there. I would maybe stick to regular bugs or like bots or stuff like that if you're going to use the Diligence. Diligence counter sniper, solid overall weapon, but I find the handling to be the part that kind of like stops me from wanting to put it into A tier. The way I ended up building the Diligence counter sniper most of the time to keep decent ergonomics is I actually put like the 1.5x, so you keep the ergonomics in check. I actually don't put any underbarrel, and then I put a flash hider or no attachment if you want a little more ergonomics. Because the ergonomics of the weapon is quite slow, it can be hard to use on bugs if you don't kind of end up building the Diligence counter sniper in that way. Now, if you build it in that way, I think it deserves to be an A tier. You have a medium pen weapon, hits hard, tons of durable damage, decent ammo supply, and you have that range capability if you need it with the muzzle velocity and damage fall off. So I like it personally, but your mileage may vary depending on what attachments you like to run on it. The Knight, the pay-to-win weapon of the game. Don't think it really deserves to be much higher than C tier. I think it'll be somewhere next to the tenderizer. Unfortunately, the light pen and lack of stagger and pretty low ammo economy, because you can go through the 70 rounds extremely fast on the Knight, and the rupture enemies are more or less going to bully you because you're probably going to want something a little bit more precise in the light pen area for it. But let's say you got like a Hunter Pouncer variant of the Hive worlds, it'll feel a lot better, that's for sure, but definitely harder to use if you don't have something else in your loadout to supplement it. Next, we have the STA-11, which is the Killzone SMG. I'm going to put it all the way down in D tier. It's just straight up a worse worse version of the Knight in many respects. Similar damage, but you're getting a lower fire rate and lower magazine and way more recoil in comparison, especially since the Knight has so many good attachments and the ST11 has none. The Reprimand, the SMG that is not actually an SMG. It is actually an AR in the SMG slot. Solid A tier weapon, smaller magazine, but because it hits so much harder than, let's say, something like the Liberator Penetrator, because of the 125 damage, it ends up feeling like you have like a 50 round magazine instead of 25, because each bullet just goes farther. It does more damage. With the attachments reducing recoil, you can actually make it feel somewhat similar to Liberator Carbine, and it just feels nice overall. Magazine count will probably be the biggest problem that I find that people might have with this weapon, but I do like it and I would recommend trying it out. It has no stagger, but it at least has the decent ergonomics and like bullet damage that is quite nice versus the rupture strength. Going into the Defender, I find the Defender more or less just the SMG equivalent of the Liberator. You obviously have the one hidden part of the weapon, which is nice if you're doing like the SSD or the specimen sample, trying to get that out, or the egg. But because it's light pen, it has a very low DPS. So I find that low DPS really affects it on the bug missions, especially if like a stalker's in your face, or like you need to drop this enemy or that enemy in front of you. You just don't have that damage per second that you might want. This weapon will feel a lot better on like bots or eliminate, but on bugs, it's just low damage per second. It's very easy to use, but I would rather end up using maybe like the Knight, just because at least I can drop the enemy in front of me way faster. The Halo SMG, we have a suppressor on it, but apparently it's not actually producing a sound profile. The stats of it are very similar to that of the Killzone SMG. They're more or less like within like a very small proximity. It's more or less the Killzone SMG, but with less recoil. So at least it makes it a little bit more usable. I've heard reports that the suppressor is not actually like affecting the sound profile of the gun. I cannot confirm that, but these are just reports. It's somewhere in like the C tier. I think it's like a low C tier. It's definitely better than the STA11 in my opinion, but it's not much better. And because it's light pen, it just can't exist much higher than that. Pummeler, more or less, I think is like similar to the Liberator Concussive, but I would prefer to use the Liberator Concussive on average. The Pummeler tends to stun enemies similar to the pacifier, whereas the Concussive Liberator tends to knock back enemies. I prefer to use Liberator Concussive overall, but some people may like just how easy the Pummeler is to use, and like, you know, when outfitted with like the massive magazine and just like overall like how easy it is to use, some people may prefer that over, and I think that's totally fair. I do wish the Pummeler stunned faster, less bullets, like maybe 1 to 2 on average, because of how slow the fire rate is to just stun an enemy immediately right in front of you. The Halo shotgun, more or less, it is the Punisher variant. It does more damage than the Punisher, but hits very similar breakpoints to the Punisher. You get less accuracy because you don't get the Punisher's full choke, which honestly, I really enjoy the full choke of the Punisher. You can start using it almost like at mid-range, because shotgun shells in this game don't actually lose that much momentum over distance. So like the damage does not really change that much over distance, which is pretty cool. But that being said, I like it. It's just not always the most useful versus rupture. Unsurprisingly, it's going to be somewhere in like the B- C+ range. The reason why I'm saying that is that at least it has a lot of stagger and you can push back enemies that push you, and you can do a ton of damage. So even if you do get like the rupture warriors like underneath, leg shot, or like kind of behind, you are probably going to one-shot it with the shotgun, which is pretty sick. Punisher, I'm going to basically put it like right next to the Halo shotgun. Like I think both of them are like more or less like just always on par. There's like basically just positive or negatives to either. Like, yeah, you have a smaller magazine with a Halo shotgun, but because the reload is just so fast and so consistent, that like the extra 16 rounds in this magazine don't really make a difference to an experienced player that just knows that because it's round reloaded, after I take a shot, just start reloading and then just take a shot whenever I need to interrupt it. More or less, they're just the same weapon, just different ways of approaching it. Slugger, I think the Slugger is seriously in the A tier, and if you haven't tried it out since the whole debacle of it being nerfed all those many moons ago, I would recommend it. There's tons of stagger on it for someone who has a pretty precise aim. I do think it's even like better than actually like the Reprimand or the Diligence counter sniper, because you get knockback. The Slugger has that original like stagger force, so like Brood Commander's not going to be touching you. If you're shooting at a spewer, he'll stop spewing or just not spew in the first place, and just in general, it feels really nice if you have a skilled hand. Now, this is definitely a weapon for someone that is like more precise and can hit those shots, because like Hunter Swarm could be very menacing to you if you have a Slugger in your hand and you don't have something else in your loadout loadout if you're not very confident with your aim in that regard. Just keep that in mind, but I do think it's a good weapon. Highly recommend trying it out if you haven't already, especially on Rupture. The halt as a shotgun is a bit of a surprising one. If you guys have not seen the halt is actually able to bring enemies up out of the ground because its alternate fire is EMS. It's like electromagnetic, and it actually stuns them, and you can like shoot the ground above them and they'll get stunned and come out of the ground, which is kind of nice. And then you can just shotgun them in the face. There's actually a cool synergy there. Now, you obviously have to be pretty good about swapping weapons back and forth in order to really utilize the halt. So for some people, they might just prefer the ease of usage as the slugger. They don't have to fuff around with like swapping back and forth ammo types, but the slugger can't get Rupture enemies up out of the ground. So keep that in mind. The Cookout. I think the Cookout, even though it's light pen, still deserves to be in like this A tier. I don't think it's really touching the S+ tier or like anything like the Coyote, just because the Coyote has that extra medium pen delivery of the incendiary round, and you will get it. Pouncer variant, Freedom Flame feels great. It feels awesome. Whenever you run into those enemies, it's great. And you still will light a lot of enemies on fire that have those medium pen. Like, you just need a couple pellets to land on like a Hive Guardian or even a Rupture Warrior in order to light them on fire. It's just when you get really close and you're not able to hit like those light pen shots, it'll suffer more, which is why it's just kind of like middle of the road A rather than its typical like closer to S. So still a great weapon, highly recommend, but you might favor other weapons over it in this particular faction. The Breaker shotgun, middle of the road B, a light pen shotgun, but honestly it has so much damage per second, and with all of the attachments you can throw on it, I've always enjoyed this weapon for just outright slamming rounds into a enemy in front of me. It's just really fun. I enjoy really using it with like short mags. That might be a surprise to some people, but I really like using it with the short mags and just having that general like damage per second. Rupture Warriors will bully you from time to time, but hopefully you have something else in your loadout that can help with them, which is why like it's definitely on the lower side of the B tier with a light pen requirement going on. The Spray and Pray to me is not as good as the regular Breaker. I find that I definitely need to shoot twice as much to do the same amount of impact as the regular Breaker. Yes, it has a 10% faster fire rate, but on average, I find the Breaker Spray and Pray just takes too long to kill things. And this is like a DPS comparison kind of situation where the Spray and Pray, yes, it has a faster fire rate, but it's not fast enough to make up for the much smaller like damage per rounds. So personally, I tend to just favor the Breaker. Yes, the Spray and Pray might have more total damage over its total reserves, but I will gladly take that hit if that means the enemy that is directly in front of me that could easily kill me, I can kill before it kills me. So that's just my take on that. Spray and Pray, not terrible weapon here, but I do think there are better choices. The Breaker Incendiary is more or less like B+ A-. My main concern here with the Breaker Incendiary is the ammo economy and how people use it. I find most people don't tap fire the Breaker Incendiary. They just see it as a breaker and they're like, I must spam fire this thing. And they go through those magazines way too fast. Luckily, it has the short mags. And I feel like I actually like using the short mags because it stops me from just spam firing enemies that don't really need to be spam fired. And then I use it with like full choke or duckbill to just spread fire a little bit easier or spread fire more accurately on specific enemies with the full choke. But duckbill is a fun one because you might have a large amount of hunters in front of you and one shot could light like 7 enemies on fire with just one shot, which is pretty cool. So I highly recommend it. I still think it's a very solid weapon, but once again, light pen, no stagger, unfortunately, which is another reason why the Cookout tends to just be the better bug killing weapon. Maybe use it, but I think the Cookout is overall the better of the two incendiary shotguns. Getting to the broken weapons of the tier list, I'm just going to quickly put both of them up here. Crossbow and erupter are in a league of their own. The Crossbow is the better of the two in this situation, just because explosive damage affects Rupture enemies that are currently burrowed. So what that means is that when you see them digging below the ground, you can actually one-shot them with the Crossbow and they don't even have to come up out of the ground. You just see some like the bug guts come up and they're dead. Very strong. If you're good with these weapons and you have good positioning, they are absolutely S+ tier just because of their raw killing ability. They're extremely good versus spewers, extremely good one-shotting Rupture Warriors, extremely good for just locking down a bug breach because they just have so much damage per shot. They're essentially like a grenade launcher per shot. They're just so good. You might need something else in your loadout if something gets too close to you or something along those lines, but you typically will just have that regardless. So the Exploding Crossbow is just insane. The Erupter is not as good as I was saying, just because not all of its damage is located behind the explosion. A lot of the damage is behind the shrapnel that fires out, and the shrapnel does not pass through to the ground. So you'll get very consistent one-shots with the crossbow, whereas the erupter, you may need to take a shot, the explosion happens, the enemy comes up, and then you have to take another shot to kill them, which is just not as efficient. And also, the general handling of the erupter is not as good. So in bug-oriented scenarios, you're going to prefer the crossbow. Also, the crossbow is one-handed, so if you're using, the ballistic shield, or you have like the specimen in your hand, the crossbow just ends up being better. It's a very strong weapon for bugs. Both of them are, but definitely the crossbow more so. Possum Punisher is a big winner of the Rupture strain. Typically, I put this weapon across like D or C tier, but it actually deserves to be in like A tier. I know that's crazy. That sounds so weird because this gun has just been like left in the dust. It has been power crept like crazy. Once upon a time, this weapon was like a solid A tier in a lot of factions. Nowadays, it's like solid C to D tier. But on Rupture strain, I love using this as like the weapon to knock enemies out of burrow. If your team is struggling with Rupture, if you don't really want to worry about like potentially killing yourself very often, or like you don't have to like worry about positioning as much, the Possum Punisher feels really usable and easy to use versus the Ruptures just to get them out of the ground. It's not the fastest killing weapon. Its damage is like relatively quite low, unfortunately, in today's standards, but you have an explosive weapon, which is automatically medium, and decent magazine, decent fire rate. I actually do like using it, even just to be that guy that like spam fires that like chokehold or that checkpoint for like the flag. You could just be that guy that knocks all the Rupture enemies out of the ground, so the rest of your team can like deal with them with their coyotes or whatever. Fairly good team support, but also you're doing good AoE damage at the same time. It's surprising. It definitely surprised me. The accelerator rifle. This is a unique sniper energy weapon that fires a 3-round burst. I can't really recommend it, even though it has like some good properties of being explosive and actually doing very good damage over range now that they fixed it. And like, I believe it's like a 1 mags to a charger butt, which is like fairly good, especially if like you get the opportunity to do it. But the ammo supply is so low on the weapon that it's like hard to use. I would only ever use this weapon if you didn't want to use the purifier for some reason, and you didn't want to use the Punisher, and you have maybe a supply backpack or something along those lines. You just always had ammo lying around for your primary weapon. It's hard to recommend overall, just because like it has a charge up, low ammo count, very low magazine. I don't know. It's not terrible, but it's not the pick here. The Blitzer's like low A. Unfortunately, it doesn't have the explosive capabilities to get enemies up out of the ground, but it is still an extremely solid weapon if you just don't really want to aim with it and you want to have lots of stagger. If ammo is a huge concern in the caves and you're just struggling to find ammo, Blitzer's always there for you. Obviously, one of the main reasons why it doesn't go higher on the tier list is mostly just down to range as a factor and just how consistent it is. Arc weapons in general, as you probably know, don't always go where you want them to, and they can be a little inconsistent at that, and also they don't always have the most range. The cutting edge Blitzer, you're looking at like 30 meters max of range, which is a little bit of concern even on bugs, because I do find that there are a lot of shriekers on these missions and you won't be able to really affect them too often unless they're like swooping in on you, which is a bit annoying. The scythe is like pretty nice. It hasn't been shining as brightly as it used to, just because the fire buildup changes that they recently did with the status effects. Even the scythe is having a harder time existing because you are not lighting enemies on fire as fast. It's still like a nice like unlimited ammo energy weapon to have, but I would probably use just like a regular ammo weapon and just like get better at like finding it, or just being more reliable about resupplying myself, or just grabbing a medium pen weapon. I don't think it's necessarily bad. It's like decent. It has that unlimited ammo, but like I think it's on the middle B as far as like the power ratings against a lot of other weapons around it. But hopefully it gets better at lighting enemies on fire in the near future, and then I will want to favor it a little bit more. We have the regular Sickle. This is the darling of the assault rifles for so long, but unfortunately over time it's just been power crept so hard that like it's really hard to recommend the Sickle like I used to. This thing used to constantly be around the A tier on bugs, but because it's light pen and it only does 55 damage per shot, although it has a fairly good fire rate and unlimited ammo, it's not a particularly great weapon for bugs. I'm gonna put a B minus, and I honestly would prefer using the scythe over it in a lot of situations just because of the fire buildup, but it's not unusable. I just think you're definitely gonna have to work around the light pen quite a bit, and the damage per second of it is fairly low at this point, so a lot of enemies are just gonna get very close very fast. Double-edged Sickle. This one's always hard for me to place on tier lists, mostly because it depends on how you build into it. If you don't do any building into it, it does quite a bit of damage to you over time as it heats up to eventually like lighting you on fire and like potentially killing you extremely fast. But if you put on fire resistance, any type, light, medium, or heavy, and you put on the vitality booster, team booster, this gun doesn't do any damage damage to you until you overheat it and then you get lit on fire. And even then, if you're prone, you're constantly going to be lighting yourself on fire and then putting yourself out. Lighting yourself on fire, putting yourself out. It's really good. I highly recommend using this weapon. As long as you don't overheat it with the fire resistance armor and the vitality perk, it feels really strong. And you're probably going to be wearing fire resistance if you're running into dragons a fair bit. So it ends up feeling kind of nice against rupture and just a bottomless magazine, like machine gun like thing. Like, and remember, it ramps up a damage and fire rate as it heats up, which is really cool. I like it a lot. I typically bring it with a supply backpack if you guys haven't tried that, just so you have more stims to full auto fire it more often. But it does feel like a support weapon at times when you invest in it. Now, as far as placing it on the tier list, kind of difficult. I find if you don't build into it, it's probably somewhere C+ tier, give or take. Maybe probably like B, middle B, maybe, just because it does get the medium pen pretty fast and it's not doing that much damage early on. But if you build into it, it's easily like, I think, an A+. I honestly think it could even like fit into S tier at times if you really invest into it. But I feel like that's kind of cheating for this tier list, because I'm assuming with most of these weapons, you're not building into them. It's straight up, how does this weapon perform versus this weapon? Now, because of that, I'm probably just going to put it like middle B, but just like keep in mind, if you build towards it, this thing is disgusting. I know I'm going to get a bunch of comments that don't even watch the video and they're going to go skip to the end and they're going to see, why is the Sickle so low? This is why. Disclaimer. The Scorcher, absolutely solid A tier weapon. Explosive rounds do in fact cause the enemy to come up out of their burrowed state, which is cool. It's a smaller explosion, so you have to be a little more accurate. The reason why this is not like as like high as like an S tier or anything like that, it's mostly just it doesn't particularly have a very big magazine and the ammo reserves are very lacking on it. And unfortunately, Siege Ready doesn't affect it that much as far as bonus magazine. That's like my biggest thing. But the Scorcher is extremely good for damage per second, destroying charger butts. Like, it feels like a support weapon at times to destroy charger butts, by the way, if you have never tried it. It's insane. Or just killing like the occasional like Bile Titan and stuff like that. Really good. Shooting the forehead of a impaler. Like, it's great weapon, but you're probably going to end up feeling the ammo concern a lot, and you're going to want to have a supply backpack probably for it. I want to put it higher, but it needs more ammo in order to get there. Purifier. Love this thing. I think it easily deserves to be an S tier right next to the Coyote if it's here. It doesn't have the like bug hole clearing potential, but the ammo reserves on the Purifier are fantastic. The overall damage of the weapon is just a little bit lower than the Crossbow, but because it has a 15 round magazine, as long as you're charging every shot, that's 3 less reloads than the Crossbow to get the same amount of like shots off, which is really nice. Also, it's more usable in a way because if an enemy gets too close to you, you can just tap fire them, and it's kind of like a baby Scorcher. Remember, those little tap fires can knock enemies out of the ground. There is explosive damage on that as well. Gets great ammo economy, really good weapon. You got to be used to an explosive charge up weapon. Not everybody's going to enjoy that, and I get that. But if you're used to it, it's really strong. Highly recommend the Purifier. Okay, going into our control group, we have the Variable. This is a really fun weapon, but unfortunately it's light pen. I do wish that they added like medium pen, maybe with like low durable to the shotgun spread, or at least adding medium pen to the total shot, but it doesn't have that. So unfortunately, it's going to be on the lower end of B tier. I think that it's still a good weapon. The ergonomics on it definitely do suffer. I wish the ergonomics were a little bit better, or you could put like iron sights on it to make it even better. It does not quite have that going for it. I'm hoping that the Variable gets some little more love in the future, just a tad. I just love the idea of this weapon so much. It's so unique to me, and I wish I wanted to use it a bit more, even on somewhere where like light pen is not favored, but it is what it is. I think it's still a solid weapon, but you definitely have to work harder because it's light pen. Torture, solid A tier pick, probably closer to the bottom, because unfortunately the fire on top of the ground does not affect the enemies below the ground, and status effect is a bit weird at the moment. Some enemies will just walk through the fire and not get lit on fire. I have been told by the devs they are working on it, so hopefully that can get addressed. But regardless, I still think the Torture is a solid weapon for the caves, mostly down to the fact that a lot of the enemies are going to be focused in narrow alleys, and you can just spam fire onto them all, killing the vast majority very easily. Rupture enemies do continue to take fire damage if they go below ground, which is nice. So if you do light a Rupture enemy on fire and then he burrows, he'll probably tick to death depending on the variant. If it's like the Warrior, he will just tick to death from fire. Very rarely will they actually survive a fire tick, which is pretty cool. Torture, solid, especially if you pair it with like the Gas Guard Dog or something else along those lines. And don't sleep on it for killing chargers. Get behind them and use it on their butt. It's actually quite nice. Good damage per second. And the Dominator, solid A tier pick, but it's going to be somewhat similar to the Slugger. I find it a little bit easier to use than the Slugger in some ways. So for the Dominator, Dominator, you can get quite a bit of ergonomics. So people immediately always talking about Slugger versus Dominator is that the Slugger has way better ergonomics, which is absolutely true, but I don't find the Dominator's ergonomics to be that bad, especially when you take the iron sight under barrel. And then if you are doing bugs, hell, you could even take the angled foregrip and take the recoil hit and just even get better ergonomics. Now, I absolutely love this thing for just the pushback factor, the damage per round, the overpen. Like it feels really nice to use and I highly recommend it. If you have a pretty skilled hand, you can one tap all those rupture warriors and you can double tap brood commanders. You can 2 to 3 shot spewers depending on shot placement and how far you are. I really like the Dominator quite a bit. It's a personal favorite of mine on like all fronts, and it does not slouch here. Just be careful, 15 round magazine, and it is a pretty lengthy reload, but I do think you can definitely make it work depending on like what else you brought in your kit or just like a skilled hand in general. Okay, now let's talk about the overall tier list. Is there anything I want to change? I think I'm pretty happy. I think I'm going to favor the explosive rounds a little bit more than the Dominator. I think the Blitzer deserves to be a bit higher. The halt's a little bit lower. I do think the Torture is like up there right next to the Blitzer. I do like those weapons. I think that's fine. I think that's a little bit higher. Actually, no, Deadeye deserves to be a little higher. It's just the magazine. It's a little hard to use. I think I am happy with everything I placed in this tier list. So I will call the video there. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, please consider leaving a like on the video and commenting down below. What is your go-to? What's your S tier? Because these are mine. This is where I've been placing things and where I've been noticing people succeeding and failing. But what's working for you? Is there something I missed? Is there like a certain way to use a weapon that you found is like that I didn't really touch on? Please let me know. Help educate other people on it. If you want more content, we will definitely be doing more tier lists in the future for secondaries and grenades. I have a lot to talk about with the pineapple grenade. But yeah, thanks so much for watching. Peace out, YouTube.